I lost my job as a reporter in Washington, D.C. on September 18, 2002. I knew right away I had to make a documentary on the French resistance. Some people get despondent and see themselves as failures when they get laid off. Some go postal. Not me. I looked at my severance as a grant to make my third documentary. My friend Bruce Klein had sent me a story by D.C. writer Richard Rashke about a resistant turned restaurateur that appeared in a local magazine in 1989.
The story had two dimensions. The first dimension of the story was he had once belonged to the French resistance during World War II. And that story was like 50 years old. And the second part of the story was that he was part of a plot to kidnap Klaus Barbie. The idea was very simple. They wanted to nab him, spirit him away to a quiet place, and interview him. And they knew exactly what they were looking for, the names that they wanted. I would wager to say, when I use the word interview, that they would torture him if he wouldn't talk. In the beginning, this group of conspirators, I believe 7 or 8, had no intention of killing Barbie. They planned to see him die legally. The subject told me, and this is hearsay on his part because he was not present, the subject told me, the conspirators told him, that they already contacted the Jewish mafia to make official contacts with the Israeli Secret Service, the Mossad. They were scouting for a farmhouse where they could take Barbie, and if he stood trial in Israel and had a death penalty and were found guilty, he would die. The conspirators, using the money that my subject raised for them in Washington, D.C., rented an apartment close to the prison so they could watch, rented a produce truck to create a diversion, rented a couple of motorbikes which would cause an accident with the produce to stop the car carrying Barbie. They had a farmhouse rented. They bought non-lethal gas, and they bought gas masks. So it just so happened that there was a real accident near the entrance of the prison. And so the drivers, the police, the gendarme took an alternate route. And that plot was foiled.
And sometime after that...
So the group took a vote, and the vote decided something like 5-3 majority to kill. And it was that point that our subject backed out.
Last night on the CBS News broadcast Tonight Watch, a former French resistance fighter revealed that he and others plotted to kill Barbie in France as he awaited trial.
Assassination attempts, bizarre confessions, baguettes, bring it on. I gave myself until the end of October to find a band of possibly dead Frenchmen who had allegedly plotted 15 years ago to kill the butcher of Lyon. No problem.
Bonjour. Est-ce que je peux parler avec
September 24th to October 1st. I phoned the resistance museums and foundations in Paris and Lyon and arranged to interview several veterans of Combat and Marco Polo, the resistance factions the restaurateur joined. October 2nd. Convinced I have enough sources to eventually prove or disprove the conspiracy theory, I make my travel arrangements in France.
Oh, start over. 4121.
October 4th. I call former D.C. prosecutor Joe DeGenova, who looked into the plot after the restaurateur spilled his beans on CBS.
I saw a news report of it. I believe it was on Channel 9. And then either the next day or 2 days later, I had a visit from the special agent in charge of the FBI Washington field office who wanted to chat with me about it, and I chatted with him, and we just sort of both relatively hot at that time. No one really believed that anyone would publicly talk about a plot to assassinate somebody if it were true.
October 5th, a sniper terrorizing the D.C. area has claimed 6 lives over the past 3 days. The former wife of the restaurateur, frantic over this documentary idea, phones me. She notes his tendency to embellish stories. Later that day, one of the restaurateur's daughters also calls me and speaks of his ability to bend the truth. 3 red flags in 2 days. Suddenly, I'm calling Priceline and Rail Europe in a panic.
I made a mistake.
But
I don't
resistance is
understand why you
futile.
can't just give me, some sort of credit, like Priceline dollars or something.
October 6th, I turned to Richard Rashke seeking assurances.
The first thing I did when I began to work with the subject was to listen to his story and then to set a number of journalistic traps to see whether I could find out if he were lying. The traps had to do with grilling him for 2 hours one day and then coming back the next day and going over portions of the story to see if there had been any changes whatsoever. And the details were so real that it would be almost impossible for someone to make them up. And usually when you make up details, you trip yourself up. The more I went over the story with him, he was totally consistent from beginning to end. I felt very comfortable with the subject when I said, if the magazine springs for a trip for you and me, will you take me there? Will you take me to each and every one of these co-conspirators? Will you walk me through where you met? And he agreed to take me there and meet people.
October 7th, a representative of one of the resistance associations phones me from France. My restaurateur isn't listed in an authoritative directory of resistance. How do you say "do" in French? False identities, deception. I began to think I've written myself into my own resistance yarn.
Bonjour.
I call an acquaintance of the restaurateur who promises to fax me papers proving he was in the resistance. 2 days later, they arrive. October 9th. I have been a DC-based reporter for 6 years, but today I am filing my first Freedom of Information Act request, seeking information on any potential FBI inquiry into the plot. A day later, an official with the FBI's FOIA section phones me back to say there is a record in the Bureau's Klaus Barbie files of a foreign police cooperation in 1987. Trying to stay out of the sniper's sights, I drive to the National Archives to retrieve the FPC report. But the document proves to be another dead end. It speaks of an FBI investigation into a Utah man who tried to mail Klaus Barbie a book in 1987.
And I found it quite fascinating that if the FBI looked into this plot to kidnap Barbie, why wouldn't they interview the subject himself, who said on national television that there is such a plot?
It was October 10th, and I was set to leave for Paris in 72 hours. Hell with it, I thought. I gotta get out of Dodge anyway. October 14th, I arrive in Paris after a relatively painless flight. My first stop is the Fondation de la Resistance, where I meet with archivist Frans Malicy. He shows me many photos of resistance, some of them revealing shocking brutality committed by the Gestapo. This man was sentenced to die at the guillotine. He was 20.
Monsieur Malicy has never heard of my restaurateur or a conspiracy to assassinate Klaus Barbie. But even if there was no plot, I understand why the French would have wanted Barbie dead, even though they abolished the death penalty in 1981.
October 15th, I visit La Musée de l'Ordre de la Libération, which honors decorated veterans of the war. There I find many more pictures of resistance. Charles de Gaulle's triumphant arrival in Paris in '44, partisan newspapers, and Fort Montluc, where Lyonnais prisoners were executed by the Gestapo. But I turn up nothing on the plot. Nor do I have any luck when I phone a cranky Raymond Aubrac, one of Lyon's most famous resistants. He asked me to send a letter explaining what I want. I table that idea for now. Later that day, I visit Parc André Citroën, which my guidebook calls a 21st century park. I was hoping to capture some postmodern vistas on tape, but I couldn't seem to stop photographing myself. Then I meet Arnaud Greyer, a French journalist who has worked with Serge Klarsfeld, the Nazi hunter who turned over Klaus Barbie to the French in 1983. Arnaud tells me he's never heard of an assassination plot, but, he says, the man who killed Vichy official turned homme d'affaires René Bousquet in 1993 had tried to get some target practice in with Barbie around the same time the restaurateur was conspiring to kidnap the Nazi.
And Christian Didier also tried to kill Barbie in May 1987, but it was a failure. He entered the prison in Lyon, where he was waiting for his trial. He said to the police at the entry that he was Professor Didier, the doctor who was in charge of Barbie, and that he wanted to see him. So the people let him go, but when he went through the metal detector, he carried a gun with him, and the detector rang. So he only surrendered. He said, "Okay, I'm not a doctor. I'm here to kill Klaus Barbie." And he surrendered to the police, and he was jailed. I think that he wanted to kill Barbie, most especially for self-advertising. I think he was a kind of writer. He wanted to be famous. Really, nothing shows his connections to a group of the resistance. So, I mean, if it's the case, I mean, it's something very, very well hidden.
I ask Arnaud if he thinks I'll ever be able to dig up any evidence of the plot.
Yeah, it might be very difficult for you to find somebody who could confirm that. And if some people know it, I can understand very easily that there is a kind of omerta, a law of silence about this plot. Yeah, it's going to be very difficult.
Afterwards, I walked past Notre Dame and the Hotel de Ville, taking snaps with my still camera and thinking I was never going to get to the bottom of the story. Way back in the last millennium, a college professor of mine said one way to divide the world of 20th century literature was between modernist detective fiction, the whodunit to Adela Quested in the Caves of Marabar, or Beckett's Missing Person Case, versus the self-reflectivity of the postmodern era. Maybe the meta-documentary genre played itself out around the time Nick Broomfield was proposing that Courtney Love had Kurt Cobain whacked. But somewhere between the cathedral and my Montmartre hotel, I mused that maybe I'm on more of a Rushdian quest, where I can't be separated from the history I'm investigating. I decided to make a documentary about my search for the truth. Wait a minute, what the hell am I talking about? October 16th. On a soggy Paris morning, I meet Monsieur Mathieu Jean Villard, a wide-eyed and dapper veteran of the combat faction of the Lyon resistance. His job was mostly to distribute combat propaganda. He said people knew that anyone that was taken to see Klaus Barbie would never be seen again. Monsieur Villard has never heard of the restaurateur, nor does he recognize him from his photo, nor does he recall any of the anecdotes in Richard Rashke's story, including the Barbie kidnapping plot. Furthermore, Monsieur Villard says a document claiming the restaurateur was in a resistance guerrilla group known as a maquis may not be authentic. But, Villard points out, there was no official registration of resistance, and they felt it was best to know as little as possible about their compatriots in case they were captured.
You may not find the exact interpretation of the exact story of what happened, but I don't think there was such thing as a reality. It was different people's interpretation of what happened.
Two sources are very important for certain kinds of stories. I didn't feel that two sources were important for this story, which was like a memoir. Now, if anyone would read my piece, and people have, it's going to become apparent to them two things. One, that I have no second source for this character. I am telling his story as he told it to me. That's the first thing that's obvious. The second thing that's obvious, other than the fact that it's beautifully written, the second thing that's obvious is that I did a lot of historical research to fill in the background.
That evening, Berenice and I meet Monsieur Léon Landini, a veteran of the Carmagnole Liberté faction of the resistance, at his suburban Paris home. Monsieur Landini joined Carmagnole Liberté in Lyon in 1944 and began derailing trains and blowing up factories with vigor. He says his faction of Carmagnole amassed an arsenal by holding up the French police known as milice with fake guns fashioned out of wood. Monsieur Landini was soon arrested and sent to the Gestapo, where he was beaten and kicked within an inch of his life. Then Klaus Barbie came in the room. He told Landini if he didn't talk, he would be given a bath, a form of torture where prisoners were alternately subjected to boiling and freezing water.
On a commencé tout de suite par me frapper.
When Barbie said he would kill you, one could see in his eyes he meant it, says Landini. He was then taken to a chamber that was worse than anything he's ever seen in horror films.
Je n'ai jamais vu quelque chose d'équivalent à ce que
More
j'ai
than
vu
50
là-dedans.
people were there, and none of them had a human face anymore. Some were missing their teeth. One man's eye was hanging out of its socket. The Gestapo had applied a cheese grater to another man's buttocks, turning his flesh into hamburger.
Il n'y a pas d'héroïsme, hein. On est tellement convaincu qu'il ne faut
Many of
rien
Monsieur
dire.
Landini's
De toute façon,
comrades
nous
died at the
savions
hands of the
que
Gestapo, but he says thanks to his dignity and ideals, he survived.
Dansons la Carmagnole, vive le son, vive le son. Dansons la Carmagnole, vive le son du canon. Assaillera, saillera, saillera, tous les bourgeois à la lanterne. Assaillera, saillera, saillera, tous les bourgeois on les pendra. Et si on les pend pas, on leur cassera la gueule. Et si on les pend pas, la gueule on leur cassera. Dansons la Carmagnole, vive le son, vive le son. Dansons la Carmagnole, vive le son du canon. Voilà la Carmagnole.
Encore, encore.
Lastly, he tells me he's never heard of the restaurateur or the plot. He adds that Carmagnole Liberté didn't use prostitutes to solicit information from the Nazis, as Raschke says Marco Polo did. Monsieur Landini does confirm one of Raschke's anecdotes, however, the massacre of resistance and Jews at Braun Airport just before the Allies liberated Lyon on September 3rd, 1944. October 17th. I arrive in Lyon that evening. I'm immediately struck by how Kafkaesque it can be, with so many dark twists and turns. But then there are other quarters that sparkle like diamonds. October 18th, I venture over to la Centre d'Histoire de la Résistance et de la Déportation, where the staff is eager to help me on my project, whatever it is. They too have heard of neither the restaurateur nor the plot. One archivist tells me he recalls a plan by Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, to nab Barbie during his trial, but he refuses to say this on camera. At the Resistance Center, I meet Monsieur Gérard David, a sanguine man who escaped forced labor in Germany after a friend in the statistics department removed his file. After that, Gérard David no longer existed. He was then Spades King, who carried letters and plans for Marco Polo.
Alors, FTP, franc-tireur partisan.
Spades King says it's easier to remember the war than what happened 3 days ago. Yet he doesn't recall the restaurateur nor any of the details in Richard Raschke's story.
This is a laissez-passer, which says that in this letter...
Spades King shows me a card given to Marco Polo members just before the liberation, authorizing them to cross the bridges the Germans were blowing up like there was no tomorrow. Spades King suggests the restaurateur should have had one of these cards if he were in Marco Polo. October 19th. L'autorisation is a big thing for the French. I get the feeling that if they could have it their way, one would need the right papers to walk down the street. "Ah, you French, I will never understand your reverence for the laws," a Gestapo officer told Lucy Aubrac. I've been authorized to shoot inside the Resistance Center. Among other things, I capture a photograph of a camp operated by a Maquis. According to Richard Rashke's story, in 1944, the restaurateur briefly belonged to a Jura mountain Maquis for whom he blew up train tracks and tunnels. That afternoon, I meet Monsieur Henri Lacarelle, another Marco Polo courier, at the Resistance Center. His earliest recollection of the Gestapo is a droll one. In 1943, he waltzed out of a Nazi jail after his captors left open the door to his cell. But Monsieur Lacarelle's family also suffered greatly under the Gestapo. His father was arrested and interrogated. His mother was sent to the bath. And after being beaten by the Nazis, his sister lost her unborn child. He calls Klaus Barbie an innovator of torture, who would shove straw under fingernails and light it on fire. Monsieur Lacarelle was practically joined at the hip with the men who gave the restaurateur his marching orders in Marco Polo, but Lacarelle doesn't recall the restaurateur's name nor his face. Bruno Permazel, who compiled the list of Lyonnais resistants, is also in the room.
45 or 43?
He says one of the restaurateur's papers shows only that he joined the Force Française de l'Intérieur in 1945, well after the Allies had driven the Germans out of France. The Maquis document doesn't look official, Permazel says. Furthermore, adds Monsieur Lacarelle, most members of Marco Polo had died by the time Barbie was brought to trial. Lacarelle also insists there is no omerta blocking resistance from speaking of their secret affairs. Yet I find it curious that Monsieur Lacarelle is taken aback when I bring up Barbie. I will forge on. That night, I take in a screening of Michael Moore's stunning documentary, Bowling for Columbine, near the Resistance Center. Leaving the theater, I think that if the patrons knew I was an American, they might run for fear I'd go on a random shooting spree. Walking back to my hotel, I think about how the Second Amendment is supposed to protect Americans from tyranny. I do a quick calculation in my head. 72,000 French Jews deported in World War II. 11,000 gun murders in the U.S. a year. In about 7 years' time, we stand to outdo the work of the Gestapo. A little later that day, across the Atlantic, the sniper shoots his 12th victim. 5 days ago, my first in Paris, he killed a 47-year-old cancer survivor. October 20th, it being a Sunday, and with all of France shut down, I decide to visit some of the key locations in Richard Rashke's story. First stop is Place de Jacobin. In an apartment here, the restaurateur allegedly hid under a bed in which a Gestapo officer had sex with 3 prostitutes. When he was done, the restaurateur leapt on the bed and stabbed the Nazi to death. But there are no blood trails here. Next up is Hotel Terminus, now under new management. The bellhop lets me film inside the lobby, but I can't go anywhere else without authorization. I find no signs of the former occupants, but descending the steps, I get a chill, thinking Klaus Barbie goose-stepped here. After being handed over to the French, Barbie took up residence here at Saint-Joseph prison. Richard Rashke says that after the car kidnapping plot failed, the conspirators planted a man inside the prison who tried to kill the former Gestapo chief by giving him medication designed to induce a heart attack. Barbie survived the attempt and died of cancer in Saint-Joseph in 1991. I asked the sentry if I could speak with someone about my research, but he tells me to come back tomorrow.
I think it seems rather bizarre to me, at least in the account you told me originally, was that this insider they found was the son of one of the resistance veterans.
Well, when I told that to you, I told you that the son of one of the resistance fighters was a gendarme in the prison. And here we're talking about embellishing stories. I think that came from my movie treatment. In other words, I got confused myself personally as to what was the story as narrated to me and what accommodations did I make in order to make this thing work as a movie.
Rashke's story also speaks of how the prisoners would sing La Marseillaise as they were being led off to be executed in the courtyard here at Fort Montluc, a fact confirmed by Monsieur Landini. On one side of the fort is a mural honoring Lyonnais deportés and résistants, including Jean Moulin, a resistance leader famously killed after a Gestapo raid on a secret meeting in June 1943. The restaurateur and his plotters were still thirsty for revenge for this incident more than 40 years later, according to the story. Last on my itinerary is the Lumiere Museum. I find it intriguing that the cinema was born in an ancient city the Romans called Lugdunum. There's a purity to these images that somehow we've lost today. October 21st, I set out again to break into prison. I'm admitted inside, but made to wait for perhaps a half hour. Finally, I'm told there are no press agents or personnel administrators that I can speak with. I pull out my camera and ask the sentry to tell me that for the record. He comes out from behind his veil of bulletproof glass and escorts me outside. Realizing I have forgotten to hit the record button, I consider going back in and demanding a retake, but I quickly come to my senses. 59 years ago today, not far from this spot, Lucie Aubrac rescued her husband from the hands of the Gestapo, who had arrested him during the Jean Moulin raid. Two friends of Monsieur Landini's were also liberated by the pregnant Lucie. I've been trying for 2 days to phone a Madame Stayer, wife of Grasshopper, the restaurateur's commandant in Marco Polo. After being booted out of prison, I decide to pay a visit to Chez Stayer in person. There I'm greeted by her grandson, Vladimir, who tells me Grasshopper died years ago and his grandmother is in the hospital. He's quite willing to talk about his grandfather's activity during the war, however. First, Vladimir shows me a list of known members of Marco Polo. The restaurateur isn't on it. Then I ask him if his grandfather ever spoke of any Marco Polo veterans living in the U.S. after the war.
Non, j'en ai jamais entendu parler.
D'accord.
Next, he shows me a history of Marco Polo written by its chief, René Poulet, also known as Octave. Octave figures in Richard Rashke's account, but Octave's history doesn't mention the restaurateur or his exploits, as detailed by Rashke. Finally, just for kicks, I asked Vladimir if he ever heard of a plot by former members of Marco Polo to kidnap Klaus Barbie.
Non, jamais.
I'm quite certain now I'll never prove there was a conspiracy, but I decide anyway to visit the Palais de Justice. There I hope to find records of any inquiry the Lyonnais police may have conducted into the intrigue. After being given a bureaucratic runaround, Gallic style, I'm routed to a friendly woman who tells me I must see Madame Goulon, who is in charge of the Barbie files at the old Palais de Justice. October 22nd, less than 24 hours left in Lyon. At 9:30 a.m., I meet Monsieur Cyprien Gabilly, who worked for Octave with Monsieur Lacarelle in front of the old Palais de Justice.
Moi, j'ai pas été capturé. C'est notre commandant qui a été capturé.
He remembers how the Gestapo crushed Octave's toes with a shovel before they killed him. And he shows me a photograph of resistants left for dead at Place Bellecour, an incident recounted in Richard Rashke's story.
Moi, je ne sais pas, c'est vrai.
The motives are there, but Monsieur Gabilly says he knows nothing of a plot to kill Klaus Barbie. Nor does he know the restaurateur or the salon his father allegedly ran as a front for smuggling Jews into Spain. Before I let him go, I have one more question for Monsieur Gabilly. With a sniper having claimed another life yesterday, this issue of whether Americans even need a Second Amendment has been eating at me. But, having misplaced my French dictionary, I ask him if it would have made any difference during the war if the French people had had the right to bear rockets. Confused at first, he eventually says that if the French had possessed guns, they would have been shot by the Germans anyway. 10:30 a.m. I go across the street to the Palais de Justice. I'm soon greeted by Madame Goulon, a very nervous French bureaucrat who tells me I can write a letter requesting the police records of the investigation, if there was one, but she doubts very much that I'll get authorization. "11:30 a.m. feeling my search is at an end, I check my email and learn Interpol has alerted U.S. authorities that a missing French sharpshooter may be responsible for the D.C. killings. I have already made inquiries about the Barbie plot with Interpol, which is headquartered in Lyon, but I decide anyway to pay a surprise visit. I'm secretly hoping to learn more about this mysterious Gallic rifleman. 1 p.m. Inside, after initially being told there is no one I can speak with, I'm approached by a pair of press agents with whom I had traded emails.
I spoke with...
Où il faut aller pour trouver les documents? Peut-être à la bibliothèque de Lyon.
The agent with the English accent has just told me she can't help, but the Palais de Justice apparently has documents about the plot. Telling her I've just been there, I ask if she'll agree to say this on camera. She says she can't without authorization, so I secretly tape the rest of the conversation. The agent with the French accent then confirms that the Palais de Justice has such documents. Then suddenly a guard notices I have my camera on. I'm ordered to erase the tape, and as I slink out, one of the agents warns me ominously that they have a copy of my passport. My stomach sinks as I leave the building. Have I done something that's going to land me inside Saint-Joseph? I want to email someone in the States right away, but I'm afraid Interpol might be monitoring my account. Later it occurs to me, it's okay for them to watch us, but we can't watch them. October 23rd, I wake up 90 minutes after my train to Paris has left. No call from the hotel this morning. At the station, there is a train that will get me to Paris on time, but the conductor tells me I must pay him €8. At first, the paranoia induced by 10 days of chasing assassination plots and being tossed out of prisons and secret police agencies leads me to think this is a bribe. But later, I realize this is standard operating procedure in the rail system. I arrive at Charles de Gaulle with an hour to spare. Waiting in line to check in, I whip out my camera. I'm told this is illegal and pulled out of line for a random baggage search. I'm petrified they're going to confiscate my tape, but after making me unwrap a harmless gift, I'm free to go. October 25th, the day after I get back to the States, a Gulf War veteran and his teenage companion are arrested in connection with the Washington area sniper shootings. One case appears to have been cracked, but the book is still open on the other.
But anyway, there was a bunch of people standing around. We were back in the dressing room, and I said, "Well, what do you got on the menu?" He says, "Well, we have a new dish. We bring the head of a monkey to the table, and we cut the top of the head of the monkey, and we fill it with crab meat." And there were some people I didn't know, and they were standing up.
Indiana Jones.
And I see there was a young woman standing, and she started to crumple. She was fainting. She was starting to faint at this disgusting story.
November 8th. I phoned Nazi hunter Serge Klarsfeld in Paris.
For me, that plot is completely invented because I follow the case since 1971 carefully each day, and I know that if I know well the jail and kidnapping was quite impossible, and a plot in order to kill him, of course, with the complicity of somebody in the jail, it was possible, but I believe that they spend their money uselessly because it's very easy to say that you gave pills to somebody and then it survived to the poison. But I believe I knew well the judge in charge of the case, and if Barbie was likely, but with a suspicion of poison, so it would be known everywhere.
Did Klaus Barbie have a heart condition?
No, he has nothing. His heart was not ill. He had cancer, but no problem with his heart.
But a month later, I find a 1985 New York Times story that claimed Klarsfeld himself paid a Bolivian $5,000 to assassinate Barbie. Klarsfeld tells me yes, he agreed to the plan, but no money changed hands before Barbie was extradited to France in 1983.
And then there was a story run by UPI in 1985. I found all these stories researching on the internet that someone tried to poison Barbie inside Saint Joseph in 85.
Yes, I have heard something about that. But, you know, they put him in a special cell in order to avoid to be killed. But there was just a rumor which was spread in the newspapers, but just one day and nothing more.
It's just when I spoke to you last month and I mentioned this attempt to give him a heart attack, you said you'd never heard of anything like that.
No, but it could be the poison, that story of poison, because if you want to provoke heart attack, you can provoke it by poison or by a medicine which is in high quantity.
So he...
November 9th, I meet Bill Rollins, a retired Washington police detective and friend of the restaurateurs for the last 3 decades of his life. Bill shows me a dagger he says the restaurateur used to kill a Wehrmacht supply officer in the streets of Lyon in 1944. Bill doesn't recall the restaurateur speaking of stabbing a Gestapo officer after a sexual liaison. I ask him how he met the restaurateur.
One day, I believe it was the end of probably 1969 or maybe 1970. He had called the office. I was a detective at the time in the 2nd Police District in Washington, D.C. And he had some kind of a problem. So although I was in charge of the squad there, one of my men couldn't handle the thing, so I went down and I talked to him and I met him. And solved his problem, and eventually we recovered quite a bit of money and stuff that a bookkeeper had stolen from him. He had terrorists that came in and threatened to blow the restaurant up, and of course very discreetly dealt with these, all within the law. It was on a Saturday night, and he got a call that they were coming to blow his restaurant up, and that they would put a bomb in there. So he called me up. I was home in bed, and I handled it. And of course, well, that I would rather not get into that one. But we handled it successfully, and everybody was happy.
I then begin probing him about the Barbie plot.
I don't really care to comment on anything that transpired between me and him in relation to Klaus Barbie. We talked about it.
I mean, had it gotten to the point where there was money being raised and, you know, hotel rooms being rented out, safe houses in the country? I mean, had it gotten to that point?
Well, that was rumored.
But you don't know if it was true?
No, I don't care to comment on that, but it was true.
So it may be true, but you're not going to comment?
Yes, it may be true. I will say that I believe that there to be some substance to it. That's about as far as I can go with that one.
Substance beyond the level of just talking about it, though, or the substance that they were talking about in the story where, you know, they had money raised and, you know, they had everything ready to go?
Money was exchanged.
Then Rollins offers a surprising revelation.
There were other people involved other than Klaus Barbie.
Other people, like, around here?
No, other German soldiers were involved. he wasn't the only
He wasn't the only target?
person, I think, that would have been a target.
I asked Rollins about death threats he had received from neo-Nazi groups following the CBS interview.
They accused me of being involved in an incident involving Klaus Barbie, but
What was that?
I don't know where. Well, the same thing that he was involved in, but I don't know where they got that information.
I mean, what did they accuse you
Of being one of the plotters.
of? And you weren't?
No.
So you got calls from neo-Nazis?
Threats through other people.
How do you mean through other people?
Well, a neo-Nazi group, for example, would tell someone else to tell me, and I really didn't understand that because I knew nothing about this thing, just to some extent.
It sounds as if Rollins may have just confirmed there was a plot, but I think of something Joe DeGenova told me.
If he was a police officer, he never came forward with it, to my knowledge.
I asked Rollins what it's like to be a detective. He offers some intriguing insight on the sniper case as part of his response.
I heard some guy come out, an FBI analyst, say this was a hate crime. May very well be a hate crime, but not the kind he was talking about. I mean, these people obviously hated something. You know, they had a lot of hate. Unusual case. That case is still not over. That's going to be it's going to be very interesting, that case.
November 13th. As I drive to suburban Maryland, I think of something I read recently about the difference between the truth of the imagination and the truth of external reality in journalism. I can't decide which category the Barbie plot falls into. One thing of which I am reasonably sure, however, there are no facts about the resistance in Richard Rashke's story that the restaurateur couldn't have gotten from another source.
When he mentioned places and names and dates, to a certain extent, I could go back to history books and verify some of this stuff. It felt so real. Both the French resistance portion of it felt so real in terms of detail, names, places, that I said to myself, I believe the story. He's probably embellished it.
Was he the type of man who would exaggerate, maybe embellish the truth?
Not very often. He did in a joking sort of way. I think when he got bored with a conversation, he would embellish things, but that was part of his masterful approach at showmanship. He was a master showman. He could have put Barnum and Bailey to shame, probably.
But my experience when people embellish a story, the core of the story is true. The core of the incident is true.
There's a thin line. Embellishing is not the same as lying.
Here is Camille Richardot, decorated French resistance chef and former owner of Washington's Chez Camille. He befriended the restaurateur in the mid-1960s and saw him every week for the rest of his life. Yet today, November 13th, Camille says his restaurateur ami rarely mentioned the resistance.
How do you know for sure he was in the resistance?
I don't know.
You don't know?
He told me about that, you know,
Yeah.
but I got no proof.
It was true that he was part of the resistance. I know that. I've talked to people from Lyon who fought beside him. I've seen photographs of him. Some in some articles of French uniform. And of course, I imagine after the war, everybody claimed to be a resistance fighter.
I never questioned the validity at all. I know that in recent years, France has had to suffer the revelations that maybe there were fewer people in the resistance than we might have thought. I remember I was sitting with a friend of mine who was on Bastille Day, and we're all out on the sidewalk, this huge Bastille Day party that they would have at the restaurant. And I said, here comes the owner. I said, you know, he was in the French resistance. And this guy's kind of cynical. He says, have you ever known any Frenchman who was not in the French resistance?
Did he ever talk about Klaus Barbie?
We will talk about Klaus Barbie. Remember Klaus Barbie, you say, ah oui, regarde. This one, he say, oh la la, we have a problem there.
Well, he was very upset that Klaus Barbie had escaped what he thought he had escaped justice, no matter whether anybody had him or not. He was somewhat upset at the French government also, that they didn't just kill this guy.
I show Monsieur Richardot a copy of Richard Rashke's story, and it appears as if he might read the whole thing in front of me.
Well, what about the assassination plot? Would that have been good publicity for the restaurant?
Assassination for what?
For Klaus Barbie? I mean, would that be good publicity to have?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
It was a factor in my mind when I first met the subject. Is he doing this? Does he want to write a book or an article or a movie? Is he doing this for publicity, for his restaurant? As the subject told me with a smile, his restaurant was a hotbed of sedition, that the FBI agents would lunch there watching the KGB agents.
There were occasions when a couple of FBI agents would come to the restaurant early in the morning before they opened, and he met them there. And they said, we're going to be in for lunch, the two of us, my partner and myself. We're going to have a man with us, and we want you to seat us here. Okay? And they said, with your permission, we would like to place this microphone under the table. So they were going to bug this person that they brought into the restaurant.
It seems to me that if this story were true, he would have gone to all his friends and asked them for money.
Ah.
Right? So it seems that if it were true, he would have come to you and asked you for money.
Yeah, but he do. No, never asked nothing.
And I think that the subject saw that if his story were sold for a movie, he would make a nice chunk of money.
He wasn't hurting for money, though, was he?
I don't think he was hurting for money. I didn't get the impression that he was hurting for money. But he's a man with big appetites. Here's a man who liked to travel around the world hunting.
No, I'll absolutely tell you that probably was not true, that hypothesis. He did not, he had a lot of people offered, trying to do movies. Right. It was a distraction to him.
He didn't need the money.
No, he didn't need the money at all.
You say he was eccentric. Well, what about his personality was eccentric?
Full of pep, very full of life, and fishing, hunting, story, I kill a deer, I kill a bear, or I take a fish like this, something like this.
He took a fish like this?
Ah, but let me see him.
Did those stories sound true when you say...
Ah, but c'est possible, he go to Florida,
And he'd say sometimes that he killed a bear?
He killed a bear,
Did you ever see the bear?
No. Sorry for me.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that's true, that he killed bears?
C'est possible.
Everything's possible, I guess.
Everything's possible.
Yeah.
I said to him, did you see these gas masks? Did you see the gas? Did you see the vans? Any of that stuff? He said, no. Well, I said, how do you know they were telling you the truth? He said, well, I don't know for sure they're telling me the truth, but I saw the sales slips or the account.
Couldn't they fabricate that?
All of this could have been fabricated, of course. It is possible that the subject was not a member of the French resistance. It is possible that the stuff that he picked up secondhand by hanging around. I had no reason to suspect or to believe that possibility. It's also possible that he read a lot of books and made the whole thing up just from books.
I believe only what I see. I got a great success like him, but not with a lot of fast, with a nice and quiet
You believe only what you see?
Yeah.
So you'd have to see the bear.
I want to see the bear on the big fish too.
Yeah.
And the goat, you know, you go fishing for mountain goat. That was a goat or something, you know.
Yeah, that's my problem here. I want to see the bear too.
Yeah.
November 23rd, a day before I'm set to begin editing the documentary, I reach the restaurateur's cousin, Philippe Audy, in Lyon. He says the restaurateur spent the majority of the war in a maquis in the Jura Mountains. He returned to Lyon in 1944 and spent 2 or 3 months cleaning up the milice. Then the maquis was dissolved and the restaurateur joined the regular army for the last 6 to 8 months of the war. This matches his resistance papers, which show he was in a board maquis in 1943 and 1944, and that he received an ordre de mission in the 1st Alpine Division in 1945. But for the bulk of the occupation, the restaurateur wasn't in Lyon, according to the cousin that was like a brother to him. Then, without warning, Monsieur Audy blurts out that his cousin came to Lyon during Klaus Barbie's trial to carry out a plot with several Americans and former members of the resistance to blow up Saint-Joseph prison. Monsieur Audy doesn't know any of their names or whether they had a man on the inside, but he does know that the restaurateur went into hiding after he received death threats from neo-Nazi groups. If I need anything more, says Monsieur Audy, I must refer to Bill Rollins.
I don't know as a filmmaker or as a journalist what to believe here, because for all I know, the man made it all up.
No, you mean about Klaus Barbie?
About the Klaus Barbie plot.
Well, I don't even wish to comment on that. I don't know what he told other people.
Well, he told the whole country on Charlie Rose. The question is, did he make it up on Charlie Rose?
Well, I guess that'll never be known.
How do we as journalists know when we've got it?
We don't. We never know. It's a process. And that's the wonderful thing about working for a newspaper is once they dig into a story, they keep going, and people, we saw that with the snipers here in Washington. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. Mistakes are made, things are misreported, things are reported as true when they turn out that ultimately they weren't true because somebody else was lying. My judgment was that this is worth telling. It's worth having on the record. And hopefully people would come and build around it, as I hope to do at a later date on this story, and flesh it out even further. I believe in the process.
Does the public have an expectation that when something appears in print, though, it is the truth?
Yes. I think that the public is sophisticated enough to realize that this may not be right. And there never is a bottom to the truth. And there never is a surety that you have it.
You, as far as I know, have done more tracking down this than anybody else. And if you find out that none of it was true, do me a favor. Don't tell me. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be playing for you.